Thank you for everyone for joining us today. This is Chuck Isenhart, State Representative in the Iowa House. Some of you may know me or recall that I met with, I think, 3 of the human rights commissions last summer to talk about environmental justice and perhaps doing some initiatives in the state of Iowa. We don't really have an environmental justice strategy. There is a new person in the Department of Natural Resources dedicated to environmental justice issues. And at a future time, I hope to, engage her in a conversation with you. But for today, I've invited Monica Espinosa, who, as you can see, is the Environmental Justice Program Coordinator for EPA Region 7, to give us an overview of some of the initiatives and conversations and programs that the federal government has initiated in recent months, in part due to a renewed emphasis on environmental justice by the President Biden administration. So what we will do is have Monica present. She says for 20 minutes or so. I'm not going to hold her to it, but that will give us plenty of time for conversation, questions, and answers at the end. And at that time, what I would like to do between the presentation and the questions and answers is maybe have each of the individuals who is on the call to briefly mention your relationship to a commission or whatever. And that way Monica can respond to questions maybe tailored to the specific interests of the people in the room. So with that, I'll turn it over to Monica. Welcome and thank you, and take her away.
Good morning. Thank you, Representative Isenhart. And I also want to thank everybody that took the time to put this together. I see some familiar faces, not only from Iowa, like Monica Stone and Rep. Isenhart, but we've also got some of our staff of our EJ program and community section, including my supervisor, Josh Tapp, and our external civil rights lead person, Ivory Goldstein. So I just want to acknowledge everybody on the call today. And then, like you said, Rep. Isenhart, we can have some more formal kind of introductions and then informal discussion and questions. But I definitely want to hear from all of the human rights commissioners who could be here today. And also, if there's others who could not make it today, if you have any questions afterward or after viewing this recording, want to chat, please contact me. So let's get started. Just let me know if you can hear me okay, or if it's too loud or anything. And I also wanted to acknowledge before I begin, I live in Kansas City, and I acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the Kickapoo, Kanza, Osage, Oto, Missouri, Potawatomi, Sioux, Shawnee, and Wyandot First Nations. So I wanted to make that land acknowledgement as well. So the purpose today is really to give an overview. Let me switch my slide there. There we go. To do a brief history that many of you, this will be a refresher for. Then I want to cover currently what's going on in the landscape of environmental justice at EPA, as well as national executive orders and external civil rights laws that my colleague Ivory provided for me today, as well as examples of many of the different tools and resources. As many of you know, environmental justice is front and center at EPA and the current administration, with other agencies as well. And a lot of tools and resources are out there. We are at an unprecedented time of, billions of dollars with a B of resources going towards communities with EJ concerns to finally address some of those root issues related to health and the environment. So I really want to make sure towards the end we have time to make sure you all know about the different resources and grants and cooperative agreements and technical assistance and more, so we can make sure you all can get that out to your different groups and networks and constituents, and we can expand our EJ network in the Midwest, especially in Iowa. So let's get going, and please feel free to put questions in the chat as well. So I'd like to start with what is environmental justice? It can be defined in many different ways by many different people, depending on your perspective and your background. But when we talk about it at EPA, we first want to acknowledge that it's part of a movement, a grassroots, community-driven movement that has been linked historically to the civil rights movement, not only in the US, but across the world. And this picture in the background is from the famous protest that occurred in Warren County, North Carolina in 1982. And the Reverend Ben Chavis said that they were public outcries that we cannot breathe, I can't breathe. And this was related to the potential or actual sighting of PCBs that were part of a landfill and toxic waste going to be proposed to be dumped near a mostly African-American community. And the community was not really informed about this at all. So these protests lasted 6 weeks and they received national attention and really to help catalyze the EJ movement, as well as efforts by other leaders you probably are very familiar with, Dr. Martin Luther King and the sanitation workers strikes, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta regarding migrant farm worker rights and worker protection standards, which we're still working on this as we speak. And even our former United Church of Christ, besides Reverend Chavis, Mr. Charles Lee, who works at EPA as a senior EJ advisor, was part of some initial studies after this protest in the 80s on a very important document called Toxic Waste and Race. And there are so many others. You can probably think of your own EJ advocates in Iowa that you may know of. So at EPA, and I'm not sure, let me try and see if I can drag the little box here. There we go on my other screen here, so it won't be in the way. When we first acknowledge this history of environmental justice, we also have to look at, historical examples of inequity and injustice that have been sadly embedded into laws, policies, and practices of the government, as well as other systems. And these systems of inequity, have had long-lasting negative impacts on people of color, low income, and indigenous populations. So I just want to acknowledge those. You can see the definitions. This is a popular graphic that depicts, we're trying to address the inequality. But then when you have just this kind of one size fits all on the right, that doesn't always work for folks that might need different types of assistance. So when you get at equity, you're really addressing the needs and helping to address the inequalities. But justice is really about removing those barriers as well. And that's what environmental justice is all about, is removing the systemic barriers. And that requires a lot of collaboration and partnership. It is definitely not just EPA's responsibility. It takes all of us. And our goal is to really help address those negative and disproportionate environmental health impacts and increase the benefits for better quality of life, which is a human right? Safe drinking water, safe air to breathe, safe land to grow crops on and, use for our benefit and nature. The EPA defines environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of their race, color, national origin, or income. And that's with respect to all of our laws, regulations, and policies, whether they're being developed, implemented, or enforced. And of course, this goal, we're not there yet, but it will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from those environmental and negative health burdens and equal access to the decision-making processes to have a healthier environment so they can live, learn, work, play, and pray in a better quality of life community. And I just want to acknowledge, you'll hear more about it, but when we talk about Justice 40 is also a new initiative through one of the executive orders from the White House in 2021. This is, again, not just EPA, but all federal agencies are making the goal right now that at least 40%, if not more, of the overall benefits of their certain investments flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, or overburdened by pollution. So I want to mention that because that's going to come up later. It's important. So also want to acknowledge too, when we talk about these conversations with community groups, with other federal, state, local, tribal partners, faith-based and other organizations, we first want to acknowledge that, we do not define communities. They are self-defining. We say it in terms of what is a community with EJ concerns, not an EJ community. So I want to be clear. That's a common misnomer or term that we hear, but it's important to understand that we do not label the communities. But we do sometimes when we do firsthand or shorthand EJ screens, we want to find where are the communities that have the most susceptible, disproportionate burdens, right? And we're going to look at that across not just environmental, but public health and other factors like social and economic. So just want to acknowledge the keywords here are, besides looking at the most polluted environments, which tend to be in people of color, indigenous and low income communities, both rural and urban, we're really looking at the disproportionate impacts from those multiple stressors, the environment, health, economic, and social again. And again, I want to acknowledge that multiple generations have been impacted negatively by some of the systemic racism that has led to the disinvestment. And we're here to acknowledge that, but also do something about it and get to those root issues, especially related to health and the environment. Again, that is definitely a broader goal and lofty goal for all federal agencies, not just EPA. So I want to acknowledge again, too, the disproportionate impacts. When I say that, what does that mean? And of course, as you can see in these different photos and images, we're looking at this across, again, many different factors. We're looking at different circumstances. And in some situations, too, you can see that, again, multiple stressors, which is the cumulative and multiple impacts on the upper right. We're looking at things that maybe there's not just one, but there's more than one or several facilities located in a particular neighborhood or area that might all be in compliance, but they might all be contributing collectively, cumulatively to disproportionate health impacts. We're looking, of course, at lead paint in the bottom right with young infants and children with elevated blood lead levels. Sometimes also looking, of course, you all know in Iowa at vulnerable infrastructure with flooding, or if there's extreme weather events like droughts or tornadoes. And how is that disproportionately impacting? We all know about Hurricane Katrina and how that disproportionately impacted low income and people of color the most. We're also addressing disproportionate lack of public participation. And this is where we want to make sure that we have things, information translated in different languages, and also even simplifying the English languages if that's the main language, making it more easy to understand some of these sometimes technical scientific concepts related to health and the environment, and making sure that people have a say in what's going on in their communities, right? And then, of course, like I talked about earlier with the toxic waste and race study that came out in the 80s from the United Church of Christ, that was really the first holistic document to look across the country at the siting of hazardous waste facilities and the location of different neighborhoods, and finding a direct correlation between that and low-income people of color. That was really essential. We're talking about proximity and exposure to environmental hazards. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, with Cesar Chavez and the migrant farm worker movement and United Farm Worker movement, unique exposure pathways. We are in an ag region, and we know that there are disproportionate health impacts to people that are working, migrant farm workers and others that work seasonally outside. This could also apply to others that work in construction or other fields. Let's move on. So there's a lot of different factors. And when we talk about what are we doing, where is the authority, we know there is no, although there is no national environmental justice law, we do have executive orders, and we've had one since the mid-90s, the first one, 12898, which was, again, for all federal agencies to address environmental justice in minority and low-income populations. But just in 2021, we had three big ones focused on EJ and equity that came out. And I really want to focus, and when you get these slides, you can click on the links for more information. But I really want to focus on 14,008, which is tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, because again, there's a large intersection between environmental justice and climate justice. And in the middle is the disproportionate impacts to low income and people of color from extreme weather, right? So the other thing I want to acknowledge too is that Executive Order 14,008, this is where the Justice 40 initiative was created. And this is, again, a government-wide goal of delivering at least 40% of all overall benefits relevant to federal investments to disadvantaged communities, and that we track the performance toward this goal through an establishment of an EJ scorecard. And this is being led by the White House. So we are part of that, but it is beyond EPA as well. And then also, of course, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which I'm glad Ivory's here if you have any questions related to external civil rights. But just wanted to share a few key points related to EPA and our external civil rights program that do overlap with EJ. And that is the main one being that we do enforce several civil rights laws like Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And that, as you all know, prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, disabilities, sex, and age. And that also includes intimidation and retaliation by applicants for and recipients of any kind of financial assistance from EPA. And again, as you know, these laws were created to affirm legal obligations and prohibit intentional discrimination and practices that may have a discriminatory effect. Again, federal civil rights laws and regs do require recipients of federal funds to ensure their actions and inactions do not have unjustified negative or disparate impacts. And again, this does include cumulative impacts, persons not being treated differently or receiving different benefits on, again, those main areas of race, color, national origin, sex, disability, and age. And a big thing too that does overlap a lot is regarding civil rights laws requiring meaningful participation and equal access to decision-making processes, right? So making sure when there are public meetings that are required, again, that you are ensuring the community most being impacted does have access and understands that information, which does include limited English proficiency. And again, failure to comply with these laws may result in the termination of federal funds. And I know there's some discussion in the chat. We'll get to that soon. Keep moving. So Administrator Michael Regan, he issued a memo in the spring of 2021 that had 4 strong pillars before we had finalized our strategic plan that does include an environmental justice and civil rights goal. And the 4 pillars essentially revolve around, number 1, strengthening our enforcement and civil rights laws, especially in the most overburdened communities. 2, making sure we're integrating EJ considerations across all of our work, which we are doing. 3rd, taking immediate steps to improve early and frequent engagement, again, with overburdened communities. So community engagement is essential, and even more so advancing that and assuring it's at all levels of our processes and activities going on. And lastly, again, reminding that consistent with the administration's Justice 40 initiative, we are considering and prioritizing those both direct and indirect benefits to underserved communities. So it's a lot, but very busy right now, a lot going on. And that's why we're happy to have new staff helping us, as well as our state and local and tribal partners. And of course, our community groups are essential in our neighborhoods and those leaders. This is just a quick snapshot. I know it's kind of small print, but I just wanted to guide you to goal 2 of our FY22 fiscal year 22 to 26 strategic plan at EPA. This is the first time we've had environmental justice and civil rights as its own goal and not just a strategy to take decisive actions, right? Not just talk about things, but take actions to advance EJ and civil rights. And we also have for the first time a principle to advance justice and equity across all of our programs and goals, which is huge. So when we dive a little bit deeper into goal 2 to promote EJ and advance EJ and civil rights across all levels, we're really talking about, again, you all at our state levels and local, really making sure you all are involved and we're partnering and communicating together, right? You all are essential to that, to reaching that goal. And then again, as I mentioned, integration, right? It's going to require some changes to policies or programs and some discussions. You know, we can't just keep doing things the way they were done, right? We have to really promote the equity and the justice. So we use EJ Screen a lot. We'll talk about some more tools, but integration is essential. And a lot of that involves training and outreach, just like presentations like these. And lastly, again, the strengthening the civil rights enforcement in communities with EJ concerns. And there's Administrator Regan on one of his many different tours he's doing or has been doing the past couple of years. So these are just a few of the current initiatives or resources that you can click on when you get the slides, the different links, again, the executive orders. But again, the goal is really to achieve environmental justice, especially in the most overburdened communities. And as you all know, we've had historic funding since the American Rescue Plan the last year and a half, bipartisan infrastructure law, and of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about a lot of the grants opportunities, but go to our website here at the bottom for a lot more info. And just wanted to reference too that though there might not be a formal EJ program yet at Iowa, you never know, right? I do want to acknowledge that Rachel Zander is the current EJ contact at Iowa DNR. She couldn't be here today, but sends her regards. She's been a great partner along with all of our other EJ points of contact in our 4-state region. And but we do have just nearby Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. So you can take a look later at what they're doing to help ensure that we have environmental justice in their different programs in their states and civil rights work and equity. So a lot going on, really exciting times. And lastly, I like to, before we get into some of the resources and then discussion, just flag some of the things that might seem obvious to most, but just acknowledging in our program, community engagement, right? It's first and foremost being visible and doing your homework and learning about the history of the different communities you will be working in. That's what we do when we're partnering too with our different programs, whether it's on a cleanup or related to a permit or inspections enforcement, is making sure we do our homework and not just in the data and on our computers, but getting out and being visible in the community, finding those leaders and establishing relationships, right? It's about the relationships as well as the results and building trust. And that's the third component, right? Communication. Not everybody wants an email. Not everybody has access to the internet. Some people might like radio or TV, right? So knowing your audience and what are their communication preferences and making sure they're involved and aware and informed throughout the process, right? And of course, addressing language considerations, like I mentioned, and understanding family considerations as well, all really important when we're talking about improving in community engagement, especially in those communities with EJ concerns. Don't assume you know what the issues are. First, go to listen and humble yourself and understand, listen to understand, right? Many resources are out there. I just want to flag a few that I think are key for all of your benefit. There's a brand new update. I think it was May 2022, which is great because before it was 2014, of legal tools to advance environmental justice. So this is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of, okay, there's no national EJ law, but all of our existing environmental laws and policies do have avenues where EJ can be integrated. So check that out. And you can do searches. I use that all the time as a reference. EJ Screen. How many of you, I would have asked this earlier by a show of hands, have heard of or used EJ Screen? Outstanding database tool and geographic information systems to help us better prioritize and understand the different environmental issues in different communities and help us prioritize our work. Here's where I want to make sure you all know about all of the different grants. These are just 4 quick titles and snapshots. And again, I think there's a link. Yes, in the title, EJ grant programs. This is the first time we've had, second time we've had 2 competitions going on simultaneously. Usually we have one and we alternate them every year, but not with all of the money coming towards us to go towards communities and benefit communities. We've got technical assistance centers that are going to be announced soon across all of the 10 regions, and that will include one in Region 7 that we want to make sure to connect you all with and your constituents. That's going to be for the next 3 to 5 years. The TIC-TAC is the acronym. Collaborative problem solving is for community-based organizations, cooperative agreements up to $500,000 to do collaborative problem solving with other partners such as yourselves. And of course, we also want to make sure local, state, and tribal governments are involved in environmental justice. They have these new EJ G2G cooperative agreements. Both those and the collaborative problem solving expire or are due, applications are due April 10th. So that's almost a month and about a week, right? And then lastly, we just announced recently even more millions of dollars to go towards thriving communities grant making. And this is where we're going to have less entities being awarded, but a lot of hundreds of subawards to reduce the administrative burden on the smaller or different community organizations. So basically, they're going to be getting subawards through larger grant makers that will be distributing those at levels that we couldn't do at EPA with our still smaller staff to help get all those grants out. So that's going to be kind of a pass-through subaward going to many different communities with the subawards, but the grant makers themselves will be probably, I think, no more than 10 nationally, but then going out to hundreds of entities that can apply directly through those grant makers. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's another one related to climate change and EJ out now for public comment, I think due on St. Patrick's Day. I'm almost done. model plans for public participation. If you're ever like, oh, I know all the technical work, but I don't know much about public participation. I'm sure many of you do, but for maybe other stakeholders you work with, this NEJAC guideline for public participation is awesome. And they updated it a few years ago. Almost done. Turn it over. And more. So there's all kinds of things we've got going on related to sustainability and equity at the heart and environmental justice. And we want to make sure you all know, can definitely talk to other groups later, but I'm going to stop there. And just last thing, there's a big, awesome national EPA EJ listserv. I encourage you all to subscribe. It's good spam is what I call it. And they will give you the most up-to-date information. I think they have a new Twitter. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. If there was a question in the chat, you're free to welcome to respond to that now, Monica. In the meantime, if you have questions or comments, please raise your hand and I will invite you in turn to unmute yourself and to interact with our speaker. Let me ask the first question. I have in front of me, which I'm going to email everybody. This is a book called The 2021 Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, Funding Opportunities for States. It was put together by an association I'm a part of called the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. 24 pages of opportunities, 6 on water alone, but also transportation, energy, and other issues of concern to many of the people on this call. I'll make sure you get a link to that. My overarching question is, how much of these resources are available directly by community-based organizations, and how many are available through the states? In other words, the states get the money and then redistribute, or the state has to access the money first?
Right. I believe all of them have to have community-based organization tie-ins. I don't have that slide up now, but there's 4 currently out for just for EJ. And the first one is the Technical Assistance Centers, the Thriving Communities. Now that's already closed and they're currently in the process of making the final awards. But all of the technical assistance that can be done, which could be anything from grant writing, to better understanding environmental issues, to learning about just basic, kind of grant writing 101, environmental issues 101, that can be given to anybody in Region 7. You don't have to be a nonprofit. You don't have to be state. So that technical assistance is the first, right now, as soon as they're awarded, going to be the first way that any community that's interested in improving their health or the environment can get technical assistance, which includes grant writing. And I also want to acknowledge Josh Tapp is on the call. If I forget something or you want to add, he's been also helping present lately. He's my supervisor, our environmental justice program manager at Region 7. But the technical assistance centers are going to be huge because we really want to get the word out to people that haven't maybe even applied for grants because they don't know how, or maybe they don't have time, but to connect those dots. And then, so that's open to everybody, but the grants themselves, the 2 that are out now, the Collaborative Problem Solving, or CPS, and the Government to Government, or G2G. The Collaborative Problem Solving, the eligibility is only open to community-based nonprofit organizations. So they can directly get the funds. They can partner. They don't have to compete against each other as well, with 1 or more to be considered a consortium. Tribal government consortia are eligible. Tribal consortia, excuse me, not government, but like nonprofits for tribes as well. I think those are the ones that are up to 500,000. And again, they can do subawards or partnerships. The government to government ones are only eligible for state, local, and tribal governments. However, each of those 3 entities must have a community-based organization partner who will also receive funds. So it won't go directly to the community per se, but there is a certain requirement that each of those government to government ones go directly to a community-based organization. And the other key thing I forgot to mention that I know Josh would remind me if I can hear him telling me subconsciously is this is the first time to my knowledge, and I've been at EPA half my life, about 23 years now. And we're actually going to have funding not to go just towards education and outreach about the issue, to coordinate and partner, but to actually remedy the issue. This will include things like lead abatement or mold abatement or asbestos. So instead of just saying, hey, community, we know there's a radon issue here, get your house or apartment tested, but we don't have money to mitigate it. Now we can say these grants, both the CPS and the government to government, will help finally to address and allow implementation of environmental cleanup remediation. This isn't a Superfund site now, but I'm just saying on a smaller scale, and also regarding, I think, wood stove. I'll have to go back and look at the RFA. We can't give any specific comments for specific applications, or that would violate the competition policy. But this is the first time that we can actually not just say, hey, we want to raise awareness about the issue through the grant, but also, hey, let's also clean up some of these things that are going, that are negative, like mold or asthma triggers in households. So, and then the last one is on the way, that grant making one. That's going to be a huge opportunity again, where I hear, and Josh or others, correct me if I'm wrong, I have to read, this is the newest one that has even more money. But these larger entities that will be kind of the pass-through entities to get the funds, I believe they might be able to give out non-competitive awards, which will also reduce, or it will be a very minimal request or for applications from those entities across the country to hundreds of small organizations to get funding. So that's in the works. And I'm going to stop there and see if Josh, did I capture that right? Anything else I might have missed? Or
so Monica, this is Josh. I think you did a great job on covering some of the highlights, and I added the table that we've been working on to the chat, so folks can open it up and take a look at it.
Thank you.
It kind of summarizes the opportunities and gives links to the web pages where you can find additional details on the request for proposals.
Excellent. Thank you, Josh. So yeah, that is in the chat. So we want to make sure you download that, or we can email that Rep. Isenhart after the presentation. Great point. Thank you, Josh. There's so much out there. We're just trying to keep up as well. So we can only imagine the communities want a better understanding of what the resources are, what they're eligible for.
I see, I don't see any other hands up just yet, so I'll ask another question. I see Monica Stone on the call. Monica works for the Iowa Department of Human Rights, and she is one of the principal staffers for the Human Rights Commissions. What role can a State Department of Human Rights play and its commissions in either brokering information to grassroots and folks about these programs and opportunities, or what role could they play directly in possibly accessing some of the programs and grants?
Sure.
Great question. Yeah.
Oh, that is a great question. Thank you, Representative Isenhart, for teeing that up. I'd love to talk about that. And hi, Monica. It's good to see you. It's always funny to have two Monicas on a call. It's a rare enough name that that I always get a little bit antsy when people call on Monica, and I don't know if it's me. But hello, Dalila. I just wanted to say hi. Dalila is the chair of our Commission of Latino Affairs, and I'm delighted that you were able to join us today, as well as some of our partners on projects from Iowa State University, Chris Seeger and Lisa Bates. So some good folks from Iowa here. So Department of Human Rights houses 7 commissions specifically for populations. I've mentioned our Commission of Latino Affairs. We also have commissions of Deaf Services, Persons with Disabilities, Native American Affairs, Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs, Status of African Americans, and Status of Women. And while we have those specific named offices, I'm sure that most of the people on this call are thinking, well, what about this population. And so, as I tell people, we have those named offices, but anyone who's running into a human rights issue can get in touch with us, and we'll be the hub for information. I very definitely live in a world where I believe environmental justice is people justice, and that caring for our land, our water, and our air is caring for our people. And so this all just seems very seamless to me. The job of our commissions and the offices within our department are primarily to, I'm not going to use the words that are exactly in code, but when I think of us as a think tank for the state around what's happening for vulnerable populations, for minoritized populations in the state, where we can share data, we can share qualitative and quantitative information about what's happening, and also coalesce people to take action. And so our commissions are a great connection to people and populations in our state. They're a great source of educational opportunity, and for the populations in our state to understand issues of environmental justice and what that means in day-to-day life. So from that education, community outreach, and connection into community perspective, I think that we're a very natural hub for that to happen. And even more than that, from a data perspective, sometimes people, the EJ screen is great, but if you're not a data person, you're like, I don't know what I'm looking at. So, so we can be that translator for people, translating some of that data and information into what really happens in day-to-day life, and how people can use that information to impact their own decision-making and own actions. I realize you didn't ask this, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. We are actively working on a government-to-government grant right now, in partnership with, so many of you know, or maybe don't, that the state of Iowa is going through an alignment process. There's a bill in our legislature to do a lot of work within state government, and it's the highlight of it is that currently we have 36 cabinet level departments in our state, and we will, if this alignment bill passes, have 17. And so smaller agencies are being connected into larger agencies to align our work. The Department of Human Rights is being aligned with the newly created Department of Health and Human Services. The Department of Health and Human Services was created last year by combining our Department of Public Health and the Department of Human Services. So all kinds of alignment going on there. So my department and our work within community advocacy and services is going to be, when this bill passes, directly aligned with all of the staff that work on health equity and public health, as well as our Bureau of Refugee Services. So that kind of actually increases our reach and our subject matter expertise pretty dramatically in this process. So as we look at this government-to-government grant opportunity, it seems, not to overuse the word aligned, but perfectly aligned with the future of our work. I actually have a staff person today up in Waterloo working with some of the Black churches in the state to connect them with this grant activity. Our Iowa Environmental Council is partnering with us in this grant, as well as a number of ethnic-based community organizations, tribal organizations, and our community action agencies that serve to deliver anti-poverty programming across the state. So I think we're going to have a pretty robust proposal for EPA to take a look at for here in Iowa, that I think is going to start a different conversation about environmental justice in our state that will drive toward action. So I've taken up a lot of time, almost as much as Monica's presentation. So I'm going to stop talking and see if anyone has questions for me, or if there's anything else you'd like me to discuss.
Monica, what is your experience with human rights agencies in other states, if any?
I was going to say, not very much. I haven't had much experience yet. I know that there's definitely a lot of discussion with our states. We meet quarterly with our 8 our 4 state points of contact for EJ, including Rachel Zander from Iowa DNR. I also forgot to bring up too, some of you might have heard of our late amazing EJ program manager, Mrs. Althea Moses, who passed away last year after a struggle with just the repercussions of having I don't know what the correct technical, having a stroke. And that was very devastating to our region and a lot of our community groups. So she might have been speaking with some of you that I didn't know about, but her memory lives on through all of us. There's just so much work to be done. I know she used to be asked to do a lot of speaking engagements. I can't even feel one of her toes of her petite shoes she used to wear, but she's with us in spirit. And we know that there are other leaders out there that are doing a lot. And we want to make sure it's not at the cost of their health, right? But this is, I think, one of the first times I've spoken to a Human Rights Commission. Or some of you, so I really appreciate you all, Representative Isenhart and Ms. Stone, we had some hiccups along the way, just with the holidays and other things with scheduling, but I think this is very important work, and especially with those technical assistance centers coming out, I think that's going to be another great opportunity to make sure it's not just a one-time thing and one grant, but it's sustainable and it's going beyond just one issue in one community, but kind of like you're saying too, with collaborating and better connecting the dots, Monica and Rep Isenhart. So is there any other questions, or I have a question for you all, but I'll stop.
This is Chris Sigger at Iowa State. And so we are working with the state on some proposals right now that are following, of course, this process, and we're looking at the engagement and everything.
Great.
But one thing we have run into, I'd like to get your feedback on is, there's a lot in this to digest and learn. This is great that we're doing this because there's so many things to start to understand and then share. But like with some of the engagement stuff that we found, between the time in which people were notified that they could apply for a grant and the due date to do the grant, was such a narrow window to actually do that engagement that's listed in there right now is really difficult, if at all possible. And so we're doing the best we can, but we weren't sure what is the EPA's plan for that. I mean, was that an expectation as we're ramping up? That's going to be something that we're just going to start adapting to and building it in sooner, or what's going to happen there?
Are you talking about specifically the government to government? Because I know all of these, and Josh, step in, and I see Don's hand up. We'll get you next. But yeah, there is a quick turnaround. I think it's just because they know they have to get the money funded. I can't remember if it's by September 30th, I think, of this, basically the end of this fiscal year, and it has to be spent by September 30th, 2026. So that's why there's kind of this kind of mad rush, I believe, because we do have limitations on when the money has to be spent and allocated. And we have gotten some of that feedback earlier, which is exactly why they are turning to how can we get other partnerships, the funding and other, partners, and like the pass through the grant making funds to help alleviate that administrative burden on the community-based groups and the neighborhoods. But of course, you all as partners, I can understand you have other grants and other projects. So I just want to acknowledge, yes, it is a quick turnaround, and I'm sorry, I can't really change that.
When we're doing the best, we're just trying to follow best practices for engagement and work with the state and the clientele involved with these things to help. Some ways, first you have to educate them on improved engagement with communities, meaningful engagement.
Right.
And that takes a little bit of effort, and then to try and do some of that ahead of submitting the grant, and then of course following up if it's approved and going forward. That part's time-wise easier. We just knew that was one of the things we're trying to work through and better understand how to better prepare for on future proposals.
Yeah, I think this is kind of one of those once in a lifetime, frankly, kinds of opportunities with the surge, this amazing, but sometimes overwhelming surge of just focus and funding. It's just like a lot. So I definitely want to acknowledge that. Yes, it is a lot, but that's why we're having these calls. That's why we've got these other kind of, what am I saying? Like, not stair step, but just the technical assistance centers, the pass-through funding, the state, tribal, local, the community problem solving, so collaborative problem solving, excuse me. So there's different entities all kind of converging, but that really is the goal, is so that it's not just one isolated group or one nonprofit, but how are we doing this collaboratively? And that is the ideal goal, is helping to ensure that equity and, connect the dots with all these different organizations and groups that need our assistance or that want to be more involved but don't know where to start. And I see Don's hand up. Josh, did you have anything else to add to that before we take the next question?
Go ahead and take the next question. And then if we
Okay.
have time at the end, I'll talk a little bit about some of our plans for outreach.
Great, thank you. Hi, Don. Yes, please.
Well, hello. I always seem to be the odd duck in the room. I live in West Virginia, but I'm involved with a lot of works throughout west of the Mississippi operations. I was invited to this call by Mike Hastert at the Veterans Alliance. Is there a zone for West Virginia? Do you guys have reps? Like your zone 7 is, do you have a number for the zone in West Virginia?
Yes, sir. I want to double check because I think it's region 3, right, Josh? But yes, you all definitely have an EPA region that has similar grant, basically all the same grant opportunities available right now for environmental justice as well as other programs. So I'll double check because I want to make sure, but yes, sir.
Very good. Yeah, I've been involved with various environmental experiments to clean up messes with hemp. Hemp is a hyperaccumulator, and we've just had a very successful run of using hemp to hyperaccumulate rare earth elements, lithium, cobalt, things of that nature off of coal mines. And it's a pretty hot topic for me west of the Mississippi. So, and I've been involved. I'm just here to work, here to help wherever I can. So, but the folks in New Mexico are working on Justice 40 projects and involved me in that. And Mike Hastert has involved me in several things throughout that region. And I'm really quite honored and flattered to be invited to things like this. I'm really learning a lot from you guys. So
Thank you, Don. I have a couple more points to make. Then I'm going to ask one of the other persons on the call to say a word or two, Nicholas, if you'd like, and then have Josh close out with that outreach, those outreach suggestions. The two things I'll make, maybe for the benefit of people who will be watching the recording of this, it's not really well known in Iowa that the human rights commissions have a power, I would guess you would say, that maybe a lot of other boards and commissions don't have, and that is they can make recommendations directly to the legislature and the governor. And Monica mentioned their fact-finding missions, and so a commission's ability to assemble information and deliver it to us in terms of how we could be helpful as a legislature in accessing federal resources could be very helpful, as well as informing, community-based organizations. The other thing is we have a number of new legislators this year in the General Assembly, young legislators who are working on natural resources, environmental protection, agriculture, etc. We've formed a working group, and one of the things that we have settled on doing is offering ourselves to be present at or speak at local meetings of any group that invites us about any topic that within our, I wouldn't say necessarily expertise, but our domains of interest and influence. So those requests can be channeled through me, and I will make sure that I post my email here, and we'd be happy to meet with, right now we're obviously in Des Moines, so meetings in and around the capital in Des Moines and Polk County would be easiest, but that's an open-ended offer on the part of those legislators, so it's year-round and it's anywhere in the state. I'd like to ask Nicholas Herter, who's on the call. He's been in touch with me from Drake University about environmental justice. I didn't know if he had a question or if he wanted to make a comment on some of the work he's doing at Drake.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Nicholas Herder. I'm a journalist. I'm writing a story for the Times Delphic about House File 49. I just had a quick question for you, Monica, about specifically the placement, the proximity of the environmental hazards, and just maybe like if you could talk a little bit more about that and just ways to prevent maybe those placements or revert those problems.
Okay, great question. Thank you, Nicholas. And yes, I believe Althea used to speak at Drake University and take their environmental classes. So I don't know if you ever were part of that, but anyway, so regarding the siting and the facilities in the proximity to low income or people of color, and Josh, I definitely want to have you step in since he's more of a technical expert. And I also wanted to say, Don, I'm from New Mexico, so I'd love to hear more about what work you're doing there. But sidebar, there have been studies done. I think the first one that I read about, and that was the first one that was nationwide on the location of the siting of hazardous waste facilities near low income and people of color communities, was this toxic waste and race report that the United Church of Christ did in conjunction with other entities that I know our own EPA senior EJ advisor, Charles Lee, worked on in '87. I think they had a 30th anniversary version of that. That's really where a lot of that came from. But in terms of the siting of those facilities, and this is where I need your help, Josh, I believe a lot of that is due to local decision-making, right? And things like ordinances, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like the ability to put a metal plating or some kind of a metal recycling plant next to a daycare center or something like that, right? So I'm going to turn it over to Josh to give more of a technical response. Thank you, though. Great question.
Yeah, so just to add to what Monica said, one of the things that the agency is doing, she mentioned earlier about the EJ legal tools. The amendment that was made in May is to take a look at what legal authorities are available to EPA in the states, who have many of the delegated programs under these pieces of environmental legislation. Is what are the legal authorities to do things like look at environmental impact assessments before you issue a permit. And so that the guidance has laid out what some of the authorities are. And our intent is by November or December to put out some guidance to ourselves and to our states about how to conduct a health impact assessment. So, you know, a health impact assessment, not to get into too many details, is a qualitative look at what's going on in the environment and how these communities are burdened, to understand what the impacts might be of adding a new facility to the area. And hopefully that's then taken into account in the decision-making on whether or not to issue the permit. The next step up would be a cumulative impact assessment, which is more of a quantitative approach, looking at cumulative risk and the association of multiple facilities together in one community and what the impacts are of that. So just in short, in May, the legal tools amendment acknowledged what the legal authorities were to use this kind of information in making decisions. In November or December, the EPA will be issuing technical guidance on how to go about conducting these types of analyses. So those should all figure into decisions in terms of locations of facilities and whether or not to permit them.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So Josh, did you have some closing comments you wanted to make on outreach?
Sure, if you're okay with that, Representative Isenhart. Okay, as you could tell from what Monica shared with you all, there's an enormous amount of money out here, right? We haven't seen this kind of opportunity since Eisenhower invested in infrastructure with the interstate highway system back in the 1950s and 60s. It's important for us in Region 7 to try to get as much money to our communities in the 4-state area as we can. And so we're working hard to do that. I did put in the chat that table that we use to keep track of the opportunities, and we'll continue to update that. If you give Monica your contact information, she'll make sure that you're on the list to get the updates of the table. Also, in late March or early April, we plan on doing a webinar that will be specific to each of our 4 states where we'll talk about the opportunities and who is eligible and how much money is available. So time is of the essence here, as you all have acknowledged. So we're going to try to get that out soon. I would suggest that if you were looking at the government to government grants, that you continue to work on those applications and not wait for this webinar. But we're hoping to have the webinar out before that project, or before that application period closes. So stay tuned. We will be having a webinar to kind of discuss these opportunities, and we hope that all of you that are on this call will join us. That's all I have, Representative Isenhart.
Thank you, Josh. As far as next steps go, I don't know if it'd be possible, Monica Stone, for the Department of Human Rights to maybe put together a web page within your website where kind of more timely current information on what's available could be posted that we could refer people to. I don't know if there's a state by state a resource like that, and maybe that's, you know, a place that Josh could send this information and post links to the webinars and that type of thing as they come up. I'll let you think about that and talk about that offline if that's a possibility. I think one of the next steps that might be appropriate, we're still in the age, even though the pandemic is coming to an end, we have tended to get used to meeting by Zoom. And I think we'll circle back with Rachel Zander at the Department of Natural Resources and see what new developments are occurring out of the Department of Natural Resources. They may be able to do what I just mentioned to you, Monica, or maybe that's something you could partner on with the Department of Natural Resources, because we're kind of in the age of just-in-time information. So we are at the 1 o'clock hour. I want to thank Monica Espinosa for presenting. If you had a closing thought, please be my guest.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. We need all of you, all of your different groups and organizations, and all of your collective knowledge and wisdom, because you all have a lot of experience and connections, especially in those communities we haven't reached since COVID and just other things and lack of staff, but we're getting more staff. And it takes all of us. So I appreciate the opportunity, Representative Isenhart, and also Monica Stone for helping behind the scenes too. So thank you all for inviting us today, and let's stay in touch. And thanks to everybody that attended.
Thanks for the presentation and for everybody to participate. We'll be closing the recording. That recording will be available via YouTube, and I'll make sure that I email everybody who participated in this so you can forward that on to anybody who might like to access some of the information we